All right, people, we're here today with Kevin Hub, who helps me with the product reviews. Kevin, what can you say about doing product reviews?
They're time-consuming. My knees often hurt, but they're a ton of fun.
And do you think that product reviews actually benefit people?
Absolutely. There is a huge difference between not only getting something that actually fits your riding style and is good product, but is actually worth your time, and brands that actually matter too. I mean, it's very easy to pick the wrong board. It's super easy to pick the right one, but it's also easy to pick the absolute wrong board for yourself. And same with bindings. You put a super gnarly stiff binding on a jib deck, then you're overpowering that board and getting chatter and gnar, and it's terrible. So it's really easy to mess that up, especially when you see brand propaganda telling you this is the best binding, when, yeah, it's the one that costs the most and it's got the most features to it, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to the best ride for yourself.
Interesting. Now, we're in a bit of a paradigm shift inside snowboarding, so to speak, where I think companies are starting to realize that the core demographic of snowboarders is getting older, and as such, I've done product reviews for over 10 years, almost 10 years with Angry and everything like that, but you're finally seeing companies a little more interested in making sure that they have product reviews, whether they're good or bad, in there.
Mm-hmm.
And from your standpoint, working in a shop and everything, do you find that consumers are a little bit more educated than they were a few years ago because of this, or a little less educated?
The spectrum is kind of split. You get in kind of both ends without really too much in the middle. You get a lot of people coming in with my bro says, my friend says this is the best, so this is what I want. And then you have a lot of people coming in that actually have written a bunch of stuff, or at least done their research. They have a couple pieces of gear in mind that they're very interested in for very specific reasons. The biggest thing that I've seen that's been the biggest benefit is people are, as a whole, on both ends of the spectrum, both of those types of people are very concerned about what they're buying. Instead of just saying, don't really care, just give me something that's going to work. They're much more invested in what they actually have, and they're much more willing to actually spend some money to get something that's right for them.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I mean, you work in a more corporate retail, and in the last few years I've been doing like core retail before I transitioned out of that. And I think what you're seeing though is consumers that, I mean, I don't know if you've encountered this or not, but have you ever had anyone pull their phone out right there and pull up a review while you're selling to them?
A little bit, not quite as much at our location, because we get a lot more of the unseasoned riders, I will say. Where I think at core shops you tend to get a lot more of those guys that have been riding for a decade or more, so they know that kind of stuff exists. A lot of the people that I get coming in, the most review that they are aware of even exists is magazines, is Transworld and Snowboarder, and we kind of know what those are worth. Yeah, that's kind of the most I see, is somebody will say, well, this one a Goodwood. So,
how do you feel about Goodwood?
After talking to some brands that have talked about stories of getting boards back with no binding marks that won an award, not putting too much stock in Goodwood. Yeah, that doesn't seem like it's really what it used to be. It seems like it basically started going downhill once they added graphics back to the mix. I think when they were still graphicless and blank, it actually meant a lot more. But
well, what about that blackboard test that Snowboarder did with Sage Kotzenberg?
So there's a huge difference between somebody that can get on top of a snowboard and know what they're feeling, and somebody that's a phenomenal snowboarder. I mean, you get that constantly. I mean, that's the reason that, for instance, like NASCAR drivers have pit crews, is they say, most of them are just saying, the car feels like this. And the pit crew goes, okay, well, we can translate that into what's actually happening and fix it for you. Whereas that's kind of the same thing with Sage. And just seeing some of the stuff, and I would say from my experience, having ridden most of the stuff that he was on, he was about 50% accurate. He did okay, but definitely some of the stuff that he rode was just way off. And it was basically just, it came down to the board just wasn't quite his style. And that's what differentiates between somebody that can understand whether or not they like a board versus whether they can understand whether or not a board is good. There's a big difference.
It's interesting, to say the least. I mean, obviously, my whole theory on it is all of them fucking suck, but I'm a little biased. I mean, we all know that. But then you also have sites like The Good Ride, who clearly don't know their ass from a hole in the ground out there.
They're catalog regurgitation, and I've seen those dudes turn, and I don't know if I've ever seen one actually set an edge. They skid everything. I don't know if I've ever actually seen one put an edge into the snow and drive through it.
Interesting.
And if you can't do that, I'm not entirely sure you should be reviewing snowboards.
Well, I still think the best was when I was working at the Snow Basin demo with Steve Norwood, who used to be the Signal rep, and it hadn't snowed in probably close to a month, and James from the Good Ride came up and wanted to take out the Signal Epic, and I was like, are you sure? I mean, like, there's no fresh snow. I mean, all you're really going to do is go carve this fucking powder board. And he came back and tried to tell me that he got into some deep snow and it was sick and like none of the locals knew where the secret stash was. I mean, it fucking hadn't snowed in weeks.
I mean, Snow Basin can have some secret stuff for sure, but it's not like it's that big of a mountain that you can... Yeah, I mean, the locals are going to know where it is. I could find it. You can see everything on that mountain.
Yeah, exactly. But, that day, too, it was almost 60 degrees and sunny Bluebird. I mean, everything was sun-baked and Crustosaurus Rex out there. And
now, you want to talk about how a powerboard can carve? Sure, fine. Whatever. That's our shit now. But, yeah, those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been Kevin Hub, who also helps me with product reviews, just doing a little brief interview on the A to Z Shredcast. If you want Kevin back again for another interview, leave us a comment, question below, or anything like that, and we'll see if we can get something going.
Sweet.